No, there's a second.
Yeah, that's different.
There's two of them now.
That's
Right.
different.
All right. Good morning, everybody. We'll go ahead and call the local government small business meeting to order. First off, we'll go ahead and go around the table and do our introductions. Rita?
Rita Loof, RadTech.
John DeWitt, J. DeWitt Incorporated.
Bill Lamar, Executive Director of the California Small Business Alliance.
David Rothbart, Los Angeles County Sanitation Districts.
Nancy Feldman, Counsel's Office.
Ben Benoit, AQMD.
Vicki White, South Coast AQMD.
All right, with that, we'll go ahead and move the meeting to order. Does anyone have any questions on the minutes? Rita?
No.
Okay.
I was going to move
Go ahead.
approval. Move approval.
I have a motion
Second.
and a second. Anyone opposed? So moved. We'll go ahead and go into, let's see here. We're going to go ahead and probably skip the review and follow-up items. Derek is not here today due to an illness. And we'll go ahead and go straight into discussion item number 4, AB 134 and Carl Moyer activities. Vicki, thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you. Make sure this is. Okay, good morning. My name is Vicki White. I work as a manager in our Technology Advancement Office, primarily on our incentive funding programs. This presentation, hopefully not too long, I'm hoping it'll be concise and informative, will basically provide an overview, kind of an update on our Carl Moyer program, as well as an overview of a new funding source for us through AB 134. AB 134 was signed by the governor in September of last year. What this bill does, it seeks early actions to reduce emissions. It provides additional funding for the Carl Moyer program. South Coast AQMD was allocated about $107.5 million for projects and emission reductions through the Carl Moyer program. A primary focus of this bill is to reduce emissions in disadvantaged and low-income communities. By way of background, for those of you that may not be familiar with Carl Moyer program, this year marks the 20th anniversary. It's a voluntary grant program. It reduces air pollution from diesel-fueled vehicles, heavy-duty vehicles, and equipment. It provides funding to replace these older polluting engines, vehicles, or equipment with cleaner models. AQMD awards about $30 million each year to projects that reduce emissions through the Carl Moyer program. Although this sounds like a lot of money, it's not sufficient to fund all the projects that we receive and would like to fund. More than 50% of the Carl Moyer program funds are used to reduce emissions in disproportionately impacted areas. Carl Moyer program funds various categories of heavy-duty vehicles and equipment. In the on-road category, it'll fund some of the vehicle types are identified here. Heavy-duty trucks is a big category under Moyer, refuse collection vehicles, public fleet vehicles, and a variety of buses, including transit buses, as well as this prisoner transport bus that we did last year.
What jurisdiction is the prisoner transport bus? Is it the sheriff?
Sheriff, I believe LA Sheriff. Yeah. In the off-road category, it funds a variety of off-road equipment, not just construction equipment, but it includes agricultural tractors, trains, locomotives, switcher locomotives, marine vessels. We do a lot of engine repowers on marine vessels through this program. It also includes yard tractors at various, including not just the ports, but other distribution facilities. Infrastructure is a new category this year. We're really pleased that SB 513 allowed this category under Moyer to support a lot of the cleaner alternative fuel and zero emission vehicles that are coming online. So this includes everything from infrastructure that may be needed to fund a zero emission transport refrigeration unit that's shown here. It could be infrastructure, electric infrastructure to charge the auxiliary power needs in a truck stop situation. And a hydrogen fueling station here that's featured is also eligible through this program now. Last year's Carl Moyer program was a very successful solicitation. We received 51 million in additional eligible projects. These projects include zero-emission transit buses, a variety, actually many drayage trucks, refuse collection vehicles, food delivery trucks. In this category of vehicles, they're looking at replacing the older vehicles with new vehicles that contain the cleanest engines available. That's the engines that are certified to the optional low NOx standard of 0.02 grams per brake horsepower hour. That's a 90%, those engines are 90% cleaner than current standards. And off-road equipment, they will be purchasing the Tier 4 engines that are the cleanest available at this time. Based on the new criteria established by the state, we evaluated these projects to determine what percentage of them would be located within disadvantaged and low-income communities. And with regard to this list, at least 88% of these projects are located in these impacted communities. This map shows these AB 134 projects that we will be moving forward with. I don't want to call your attention to the blue dots yet. What this is a map showing the pink areas are those areas that have been already established as disadvantaged and low-income communities within our AQMD jurisdiction. And you can see the vast majority of the AB 134 projects we plan to fund this year are located within these impacted communities. For AB 134, project selection will be based on, the projects have to meet the criteria in the Carl Moyer guidelines. That's a legislative requirement through AB 134. And AIRB has established that at least 80% of the AB 134 funding that was allocated to us for the Moyer program must be used to fund projects in the disadvantaged and low-income communities. I wanted to highlight our proposed schedule. Last Friday, the board approved release of our year 20 Carl Moyer program announcement. This announcement will stay open through June 5th. So during this time, we will be soliciting applications for eligible projects. And starting next month, we're going to hold a series of what we call applicant assistant workshops. So we'll be inviting applicants to come hear about the Moyer program, and we'll also be providing one-on-one assistance if needed to fill out their applications. And very similar to past years under Moyer, we look to get to the board by October to seek approval of recommended awards for the program. So we are also, a requirement of AB 134 is that we seek community input before we move forward with the AB 134 project. So we are pursuing those community meetings right now. We have one Tuesday evening in Wilmington, so I invite you all to attend if it's possible. And I said 2018 Carl Moyer program coming soon, but that was just released last Friday. And then we will follow up with outreach and application assistant workshops. And so at this time, we're seeking projects for this year's Carl Moyer program and beyond. We hope to get additional funding allocations through similar bills as AB 134 as we move forward. We had a community meeting the next community meeting coming up I mentioned already is on March 13th. And the next three are identified here if you're interested. We invite you, welcome to attend. And in summary, the AB 134 provides immediate funding for projects that will reduce emissions in environmental justice communities. We have 51 million in eligible projects that are ready to go. We're seeking project ideas for this year's Moyer program, and we welcome all input on future projects as we hope additional funding will become available. This concludes my presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Very good. Bill?
Yeah, I have a couple of questions. Carl Moyer, by the way, has been a godsend to the construction industry over the years, but it struck me on off-road equipment, when the selection is for disadvantaged communities, how do you go about determining whether or not, is it the contractor and the contractor's equipment that's eligible, or the projects that they're bidding on? In other words, if your criteria is disadvantaged communities, you have a contractor who's got a spread out in Redlands, but he or she is bidding jobs all over Southern California. So what's the selection criteria on something like that?
Thank you. So these are mobile equipment, as you described, so they don't typically operate at one location. So we account for that. The Air Resources Board came out with some funding guidelines, and within those guidelines, they identify not only the ability for us to use CalEnviroscreen, which relies on a single point address to determine if it's in or out of a disadvantaged community, but we are also looking for routes or even if the equipment travels through a disadvantaged community, or I think the exact language is operates a majority of time within a disadvantaged community, we can credit that project as benefiting a disadvantaged community. So we do consider that when we get those applications in, where the equipment that we're going to be funding, where it's located, where it will be located, and providing the benefits.
So I guess what I'm hearing from you is it depends. I mean, you know, from a contractor's point of view, that's pretty iffy, because I mean you're talking about you know, a considerable amount of money in a motor patrol or a bulldozer or a grader or something like that, and you know, and whether or not he or she might qualify depending on the jobs that they're fortunate enough to get.
What we do consider is, you know, this program is a replacement program, whether you're replacing an older engine or vehicle or piece of equipment. So we look at the past 2 years of where that equipment has operated, and that kind of is the basis for the contract award. And then moving forward, we're going to be required to monitor that equipment. So the contractor, the fleet that's been awarded the funding, has to give us annual reports that describe what areas that equipment was operated in. So we will be monitoring that in time. So we look at the past 2-year records, and we also monitor it through the contract over the life of the project. Yeah.
Would that same apply to public works projects? If a public works project, you know, if it's part of a highway or a thoroughfare or a bridge or something like that, that project still has to be in a disadvantaged community, or you have to take a route through a disadvantaged community to work on that project? Or I'm sorry, I'm a little dense here, but.
No, not at all. So the language says we have to be able to justify through operational records that that equipment has been operated a majority of time within this zip code or census tract. So if it is a census tract analysis that's done. So if we can document that through records, operational records that it has, then we can qualify it, even though the owner of that equipment may be located at a different address, not in a disadvantage. If we can see that the equipment is operated within a census tract that has been identified as disadvantaged or low income, we will get credit towards our 80% goal for that.
Question, when we talk about disadvantaged communities, you said a word that always gets my attention is the CalEnviroscreen model. And I'm curious the way that's being utilized, because CalEnviroscreen puts in information that says there may be something here that may be of concern, but it doesn't mean it's happening. Like groundwater is a great example of, you may have groundwater that could be contaminated, but it doesn't mean it's reaching anybody. So I'm just curious, as far as the application of CalEnviroscreen, is that being used as absolute of these folks are disadvantaged, or a tool to say, let's just look at this as a first step?
What I do know is that that analysis has already been done and established. So that map that I showed of those pink areas, that's already been decided through the process that that CalEnviroScreen model went through. I don't know the detail of that particular question, but this is already analysis that has already been done. So with those pink areas are the areas we're trying to show benefits to. And in those
And
communities.
it may not be the best example, but it actually is a good example as far as it was intended as a screening tool, but now we're using it as an absolute. And that's kind of my bigger concern that doesn't, it may not be the best example here, but it does illustrate that we're using it as the gospel of these folks are disadvantaged when it really wasn't intended that way.
ARB has adopted that tool as the primary tool for all of their climate change investments that they're making.
And I agree that they had to come up with something, but that's the disconnect I have is they had to do something to figure out where the money would go. So that was the best they came up with. But the issue I'm bringing up is now there's something out there, there's a tendency to latch onto that as this is the absolute folks who are disadvantaged, and it's causing some issues because it isn't as accurate as maybe people think. So it's just food for thought. As we start looking at that tool, remember it was a screening tool. Thanks.
Yeah, I agree.
Are you the contact on assistance on projects?
I'm one of them, yeah. I'm the
One of 'em.
manager of a team of about 9 staff that work on the Moyer program.
So anyone can be of assistance on that?
Yes, yes.
Thank you.
All right, thank you very much for your presentation. And we'll go on to update on our news source review. Lackey.
So this is one of the 2 annual reports that we sent to our board and subsequently to EPA that on an annual basis that demonstrates the equivalency of our news source review program with the federal news source review program. So our local news source review program is distinctively different than the federal program. Certain areas of our program are more stringent than the federal program, and some other areas are less stringent. We have, for instance, a series of exemptions where we are exempting stationary sources from providing offset requirements. And the reason why we deviated from the federal program was to offer our regulated community a little more flexibility. So we got challenged. I'm going back 10, 15 years from EPA, and they told us, they basically took an issue with the areas where we were less stringent than the federal news source review program. And the argument that we made was that our program in aggregate, with its flexibility, provides a better environmental benefit than the federal program. And they told us, prove it to us, AQMD. And while you're at it, devise an accounting system, adopt a rule that will memorialize that accounting system, and on an annual basis, demonstrate to us that your program is equivalent to the federal program. And that's what we have been doing with this. So we adapted the Rule 1315 back in 2006, and then we amended it in 2011. And essentially what we do under this rule, under the accounting system of the rule, is the areas where we are more stringent than the federal rule, we track them as positive credits. And the areas where we are less stringent than the federal rules, we track them as debits. And at the end of the day, you want to have positive numbers, which will demonstrate that we are equivalent or better than the federal rule. So without going through the details, we are starting with an annual balance from the prior year. By the way, this particular equivalency is for the calendar year 2016. And we track for each of the criteria pollutants, VOCs, NOx, SOx, CO, and PM10, the credits, the debits, and the most important thing here is the line at the very bottom, and you hope that you are going to end up with positive numbers. And if you are, you're in great shape. If you have negative numbers, you are in trouble. Luckily, as you can tell, in all these columns, we end up with positive numbers, which means for calendar year 2016, we are not just equivalent, we are way better than equivalent than the federal News Source Review program. So in addition to calendar year 2016, our Rule 1315 requires us to also do a projection for the subsequent 2 years so that in the event things do not evolve in the direction that we want them to, we have some advanced red flags that we can basically utilize and adjust our course of action. So as you can see for calendar year 2017, again, the bottom line is that all positive numbers, and for 2018, the same. So this particular chart shows you a historical perspective, how things evolve over time. With respect to the VOCs, our positive balances keep increasing, while with respect to the other pollutants, they are more stable, but nevertheless, all in the positive territory. So overall, we are in very good shape with respect to 2016, and we are projected to remain in good shape with 2017 and 2018. And that concludes my presentation, and you have a question. Yes, sir.
Go ahead, Paul.
Testing. I'd like to have a question for you. Let's take LA County, okay?
Yes.
So we don't complicate anything.
Right.
Put an overlay
Yes.
on LA County. Let's make a little map and then overlay on top of it. On the AQMD regs and the Fed regs, if you're giving me a color chart, are there more Fed regs that are, I'd say, less stringent than AQMD regs?
Our AQMD regs are way more stringent
Okay.
than the federal regs
Okay.
or even the state regs
Okay.
because of the severity of air pollution here.
Okay,
Of
just-
course, there are certain areas that we can get into, like
That's what.
tracking regulations, right, interstate and stuff. But with respect to the stationary sources, we are way more stringent than the federal or state regs.
And is that only in certain areas, like let's say around the refineries?
No,
Maybe out
it's
that-
throughout
out
the
that
four
Nevada.
counties. Throughout the four counties.
Let's just take one. Let's take one county.
Let's take one.
Yeah.
LA County. Absolutely. Refiners you mentioned.
Okay.
Our regs do not compare to the regs that other states or the feds, have adopted. They are way more stringent, and our refineries are way more cleaner than
Okay.
any other refinery in the country.
Okay. Now, let's say that I'm a clever refinery lawyer, okay? 'Cause we've got lots of lawyers around here. Could I make an argument to say, well, you know what, I want to follow the Fed's regs instead of AQMD's? I mean, is that
Possible?
possible? That's a better word for it. Is that possible?
No, because the Federal Cleaner Act, as well as the State Cleaner Act, had puts us in charge in developing our local plan that will bring us into attainment. So we have the ability to develop, adopt, and implement more stringent programs that will improve air quality a lot faster than the federal regs suggest. And we have never been challenged.
Lucky, as far as your previous graph, I saw NOx going down in the
Yeah.
balance. Any reason for that draw compared to past years?
So what we do is, and that was again part of the accounting that we establish within Rule 1315, and a commitment to EPA was, every time we adopt a rule that reduces emissions, we are going to go back and reflect the same level of reductions. In other words, we are going to adjust our remaining balances by the same percentage. So as we adopt new rules, periodically we
Not
go back.
necessarily someone taking something out of the bank.
No, it can be both, but in this particular case, it's mostly the adjustment, the trend that you see over
And
there.
I'm always asking because of the priority reserve and small business, just to make sure the bank's solvent.
Of course, you want to make sure that the bank is solvent, because the primary beneficiaries is, as you said, the essential public services and the smaller businesses, the less than 4 tonners. But it's also being considered as a potential alternative as the reclaim program
That's where I'm
phases
going next.
out. That perhaps we can open the bank and make it available to them as well.
And it seems like the bank's been stable. The thing on reclaim I can't get my arms around is with all the transition out of reclaim, what kind of draw could there
Yeah.
be? And it seems a little nebulous.
There are intense negotiations between us and EPA, and there is a lot of homework that is being done internally to try to figure out, estimate, that potential future draw. So we'll be sharing those estimates once we are
that'll be
ready,
helpful
with
to
you guys.
get us more comfortable.
Yeah,
But
of
just
course.
sort of into the weeds with this a little bit, I'm curious as far as, just say you're a reclaim facility,
Right.
a facility in reclaim, and it's now an orphan shutdown.
Yes.
Did South Coast turn those emissions into RTCs,
No.
ERCs, or just
So,
did away with them?
okay, so this doesn't deal with reclaim facilities. So in the reclaim program, when a facility shuts down, basically those credits, stay within the reclaim program.
So would that be a RTC generated?
RTC, yeah, they remain as RTCs.
So the nexus here, what I know the reclaim program's separate, but now that
Right.
reclaim is going away,
Yes.
and you have certain folks saying, well, wait a minute, I put in
Okay.
ERCs to start with, now I have RTCs
Right.
that don't have a value, so I'm bringing up another wrinkle as far as the orphan shutdown's a
Right.
legitimate way to
Right.
generate an ERC
Yeah.
that can go back in the bank.
Yeah. Well,
Is there any thought about that?
It's the million-dollar question that I don't think anybody has an answer yet. But that is what is being debated. Should we take a portion of those orphan shutdowns from the reclaim program and create perhaps a new bank that we can make it available to the reclaim facilities that are transitioned out of the program and going into the command and control? None of those decision has been made, but those are.
You know where I'm coming from as far as make sure the bank is,
You want to
protected.
make sure it's
But
solvent.
The
right?
other thing is, let's not have a permanent moratorium by
Thank
setting
you.
everybody else up for litigation.
Thank you.
So the idea of having a separate bank for this
Right.
might be nice, just in case things go south.
Sounds very appealing to you, right?
Yes, it does.
Yeah. No, these are very good points that you are making, and even though there are no answers yet, but it is some of the issues, some of the suggestions that are being debated. So we'll know. Give it another 2-3 months, and probably things will crystallize, and we'll have a better idea where we want to go.
Lucky,
Yes, sir.
am I correct that EGFs don't have access to this bank?
So the bank is available only to facilities that have annual emissions less than 4 tons, including essential public services and the like. So typically EGFs, power plants, are way greater than that. Now, we did try to help the EGFs though by developing Rule 13 of 4.1. I hope my point ones and point twos are correct, where we allow them for particulate matter, for instance, and some other pollutants that they are scarce in the open market to tap into the bank in exchange for a mitigation fee and cover their offsets needs that way. The offsets out of this bank are being offered to the small businesses and the priority reserve for free. But for the EGFs, we charge them. Yeah. They do have access, yes.
Lockie, I am
Yes, sir.
I'm very unscientific and very an amateur on measuring your paperwork. For my grandkids that are running track, what does this mean? Is the air better or not?
Yeah. The air is getting better. What that says is not only we are getting best available control technology installed when a new business comes in or an existing business is expanding, we are also offsetting for every pound of emissions that go up to the air, 1.2 pounds of reductions. And even with that, our offset bank, for the majority of the pollutants, is getting better and better with every year that goes by. So it looks like we are running a pretty good program.
Yeah, I have grandkids in Torrance, and I think everybody here wants things better for their kids and or grandkids in my case.
You can tell. Yeah.
So you are doing a better job as far as when they're out there busting their butt on the track.
You can bet on it. We are doing a lot better job
Thank
than
you.
what we were doing 20, 30 years back. Yes, sir.
Aki, would it be out of the question to have somebody from the bank without drowning everybody in minutia about a little point here and point there? Let's say do a 5-minute, 10-minute presentation on the actual bank and the structure and how it works?
Sure, we can.
But
It's
nothing-
my team, though.
Yeah, nothing
You're
big.
going to get the same presentation.
No, but you know what I'm saying. I'm trying to
Yeah.
simplify it and.
There's
Because I'm
all-
probably,
yeah.
pardon me, I'm probably the only one that's asking
Yeah.
here, and I'm gonna keep asking for another 2 or 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to see the credit, the air credit
Yeah,
community come by and do a presentation for us,
sure.
but
We
I would
can,
like to
we can accommodate it. Trust me when I say that it's not a sexy presentation. They're all
understand.
numbers.
I
okay?
understand. No, I understand. No, I totally get it, but, maybe 10 minutes or
Yeah,
so.
sure. We try to put color over here just to spice it up a little bit, but
Thank you.
Yeah, Lockie,
yes, Rita.
on the demonstration that you make to EPA, I'm not too familiar with the steps you take. How does that incorporate BACT? You mentioned BACT.
Yes.
Does that have a BACT component to it
Yes.
as well?
Yes. So basically, when a facility shuts down, somebody had mentioned the orphan shutdowns, I can't remember who. So we take those reductions and we don't claim credit for 100% of those reductions, but we discount them down to the BACT level. So everything automatically gets transferred into, on a discounted fashion, on the credit line. Yeah. It's a very tight shop that we are running with this bank. We do get audited quite frequently, frankly. And like I said, we provide those reports to EPA twice. First, we send them the preliminary determination of equivalency, which is what it is. And 6 months later, in September, later on of this year, we are going to send them the final determination of equivalency once we have completed all our internal auditing process. Yeah.
All right, very good. Any other questions? Thank you, Lockie. All right, our next item will be the update on the SCAG's Regional Transportation Plan / Sustainable Community Strategies. Naresh, how you doing?
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. My name is Naresh Samatya, and I am the Transportation Planning Manager at SCAG. I'm here today to give you an update on where we are in developing a regional transportation plan and sustainable community strategies. Oh, okay. So before I did that, I assumed that some of you may not be familiar with SCAG. So I wanted to start out with a brief introduction to SCAG itself. SCAG stands for Southern California Association of Governments, and we're designated by the federal government, by federal DOT, as the Metropolitan Planning Organization. And one of our primary responsibilities as a MPO is to develop a long-range transportation plan known as a Regional Transportation Plan, and that's what I'm here to talk about. We cover 6 counties in Southern California. That includes Los Angeles, obviously, which is our biggest member county. We also have 191 cities in our jurisdiction. It's a pretty big region. 38,000 square miles, 19 million people as of the latest count. We're also a big global gateway for freight movement. And we deal with multiple regional issues in the region. Just a quickly governance structure. We have a regional council that is made up of local representatives, local city council members, as well as county supervisors. We have currently 88 members of our regional council. That is our governing body, decision-making body. And we also do a general assembly once a year, which is actually coming up in May. And we bring all of our member cities together for this general assembly, and that's where we make key decisions on the governing regulations of the agency itself. In addition, we also have 3 key policy committees that provide policy advice to the regional council. Transportation Committee is the body that makes policy recommendations on transportation issues. There is the EEEC, and Mayor Benoit was part of that committee. EEC, which stands for Energy and Environment Committee, which again has jurisdiction over environmental and energy issues, and CEHD, which stands for Community Economic and Housing Development Committee, which works on issues related to housing and population and so forth. Just quickly, so a regional transportation plan is really a visionary document that provides the framework for how we invest in transportation system over the long haul. And as I said, it's one of the requirements that we have to comply with both from federal as well as a state standpoint. There are some specific requirements in terms of how we have to develop the plan. It has to plan for at least 20 years ahead. It has to be what's called the fiscally constrained plan, which means we have to be able to demonstrate that the funding will be available to implement the plan programs and policies that are proposed in the plan over the time horizon. It also has to be developed in a collaborative fashion. Not only stakeholder, but also in public engagement is an important component of the plan itself. And from the state standpoint, one of the key requirements is that we demonstrate that we're working towards meeting the greenhouse gas reduction. And the California Air Resources Board Okay, so Air Resources Board establishes targets for each of the MPOs, and so the target for the 2016 RTP SES was 8% for 2020. And 13% for 2035 on a per capita basis, reduction from 1990 level. As we speak, ARB is updating those targets, so we're going to have to meet even higher targets for the 2020 RTP, which we're currently working on. So again, the RTP SES is a multimodal plan. We have to consider every single mode of transportation. Again, as I said, it has to be fiscally constrained. So finance plan or funding plan is a big component of the plan as well. And it also is based on an outcome in performance outcomes that are part of the initial goals that are adopted by our regional council. So why update the RTP? Again, as I said earlier, it has to be updated every 4 years. We have to take a comprehensive look at the plan every 4 years by the federal regulations. And also it makes logical sense why that is the case, because things change, the changing demographics and the change in funding, for example. Hello? There, there are adjustments that in the priorities of projects that have to be reflected and so forth. So there are multiple reasons why updating the plan every 4 years makes sense.
This is classic IT. You walk in the room and they're all working. How did you do that? All of those started blinking green, red, green, red, green, red, and then as soon as we switched them all out, they stopped, and it just keeps cutting out. I don't know. Interesting.
Testing 1, 2.
Yeah, you walk in, they work. It's working fine. Hang out for a minute.
Thank you.
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
So one of the key inputs to the plan development is obviously population growth, housing growth, and the demographics. That is really the crux of why we do the planning. We expect in the 6-county region our population to grow from current 19 million to about 22 million by 2040. 2040 being the horizon year. At the same time, we're also expecting some shifts in demographics as well. We expect that the baby boomers will be retiring, and the share of senior citizen population is going to increase dramatically over the next 20 years, and that means the types of transportation investments we have to make could be different from what we make today. Also, from ethnic standpoint, we expect a bigger Hispanic population as well as shares of Asian population to grow in that time frame, and that also calls for different issues that needs to be considered in developing the plan. Just quickly, the plan is $556 billion plan. It's a big price tag. This is over the next 20 plus years, and this is based on two things in terms of source of revenues. One is what we consider the core revenues, which is based on existing and known funding sources, both at local, state, and federal level. At the state and federal level, the biggest source of this core revenue is the excise tax on gas. Currently, actually, the state just approved the SB1, which brings additional funding to the table, which also raises the gas tax by 12 cents, and so it is currently at 30 cents per gallon. And at the same time, the federal DOT also excise 18 cents per gallon. So those are the biggest source of revenue for transportation. And on the local side, it's the sales tax. Each of the counties in our region, with the exception of Ventura County, has sales tax that brings in revenue specific to transportation. In fact, LA County has 3 half-cent sales tax. And that is a huge source of revenue for transportation. And so the local share of transportation revenue is now the lion's share of how we deliver our transportation. So based on the core, just the existing and known sources, we expect about $350 billion over the next 20 years. So that leaves a gap of about $200 billion. And in order to meet that gap, there are certain strategies that are proposed in the plan, which includes expansion of, for example, hot lanes, which is going to bring some revenues. That's not the primary purpose of implementing hot lanes, but that does add revenue. We're also proposing that we move from the gas excise tax to some type of mileage-based user fee approach over the long haul. Now, it's going to take some time for that to happen. We understand that. I know the state is just gone through a pilot project to look at the technical issues associated with implementing something like that, a program like that. And so those new types of strategies we expect will, once put in place, will generate the balance of the $200 billion. On the expense side, the biggest cost of the plan is really to maintain and operate the existing system, including our transit rail systems, keeping up our highway infrastructures, local roads, and so forth. Approximately 55%, or about $270 billion, goes to maintaining and operating our existing transportation system. And the balance, about 45%, is really for capital projects, which includes expansion of our transit system, rail system. It also includes parts of high-speed rail expansion, and also some funding for highway improvements. Next, I'll focus on just a couple of elements of the regional transportation plan. Goods movement is one of the key components. Goods movement is obviously hugely important to our region. It's the engine for the economic development in our region. It supports a tremendous number of jobs, and so it's hugely important to the region. Our goods movement system is basically made up of complex of our port system, as well as rail and highway system and warehouses that are distributed all throughout the region. It's a pretty complex system that we have, and so maintaining and improving the goods movement system so that our region stays economically competitive is very important. At the same time, we also recognize that goods movement sector does contribute to air pollutions as well. So we do recognize the need to do the part that goods movement sector needs to do to clean the air. Yes, sir.
Rongchen, while you're continuing your presentation, and to me it's very informative, I'd like to elaborate on, since SCAG is doing a lot of these separate studies on air, transportation, of course the economic studies. Now, do AQMD studies and SCAG studies overlap, like overlapping bureaucracies? And if they do, and I know it's kind of, I don't want to put you on the hot seat, but is one preferred over the other? Like, let's say Lockheed's group, who does a fine job, does a complete study. Okay, that's a little plug for you guys. Then let's say SCAG does a study, identical thing. Okay, let's just suppose there's a variance of numbers, not much, but there's a variance. Who takes priority on what study would take priority in general of the issue?
Well, I mean, we work very well with AQMD, and we have a very close working relationship with AQMD. And in fact, SCAG does not really undertake any type of air quality study. We rely on AQMD for any input on air quality matters. And in fact, some of the information put on this slide is probably coming from some of the work that's been done by AQMD. So I don't think there is a whole lot of overlap or duplications here. I believe we complement the work we do.
And our guiding document is the Air Quality Management Plan. In putting together, we are co-authors. Right. We have three authors. AQMD takes the lead, but we work very closely. SCAG is our co-author, as well as the Air Resources Board. So when it comes to the transportation sector, we take their numbers We don't debate, we don't argue, we don't haggle. We take their numbers.
We do the same thing with air
And they
quality.
do the same thing with air quality. So we work very well together.
Yeah, kind of a follow-up question on the issue of goods movement. In the industry, what we've seen is that some policies, some air quality policies basically, no problem, have a tendency to move business out of this area and maybe out of state or sometimes out of the country. And then what happens is that those manufacturing industries are still manufacturing goods, so now they're trucking them in or shipping them in. Has there been any analysis as to, you know, the exodus of industry out of Southern California and the impact on goods movement and its relationship to emissions increase from goods movement?
We have done studies on the economic impact of goods movement and studies related to logistics and the land use as well as locations of warehouses and so forth. But I'm not aware of any study that we have done that specifically looks at exodus of businesses, as such. But that's something that definitely might merit, additional study in the future.
You guys, he's got about 10 more slides. Why don't we let him get through the presentation, then we'll come back for questions. Go ahead.
Okay. So on the investment side, what the plan does is it invests approximately $70 billion on goods movement, on improving goods movement infrastructure. And goods movement infrastructure, like I said, includes enhancing our rail system as well as enhancing our roadway systems to ensure that we're addressing the efficiency issues as well as air quality issues. One of the key strategies that is the grade separation. Grade separation is a hugely important issue in the region, not just from a goods movement efficiency standpoint, but also from a conflict with the local roads and so forth. And so there is quite a bit of investment that is proposed in the plan to ensure that that we're implementing these grade separations. We're also looking at some type of dedicated truckways along the east-west, more specifically along the 60 corridor, to connect the movement of the freight out from ports all the way along the San Gabriel Valley out to 15 and out to rest of the country. We're looking at clean technologies to ensure that happens. We're also looking at specific bottlenecks within the highway system, and our region happens to be one of the most areas with one of the most congested bottlenecks in the country, and investing in relieving those bottlenecks will come a long way in terms of addressing some of the goods movement challenges. The future technology is hugely important, and we're always trying to figure out how best to accommodate and work with the industry to ensure that technology not only enhances the efficiency of our goods movement system, but also provides more cleaner means of delivering and transporting our goods movement system. Next, I'll talk quickly about the passenger rail and transit, which is another big component that's addressed in the plan. Our transit system is obviously made up of our fixed route buses, the rail system, which is made up of light rail as well as heavy rail system, primarily focused in LA County, and then we have the commuter rail system operated by Metrolink and the Losan or the Amtrak system as well. Just a little bit of a historical perspective. Back in the 1920s, we had a system called Pacific Electric Railway, which connected downtown with key areas in Southern California. But for some reason, the system was abandoned, and by the 1960s, there was really no rail to speak of in Southern California. Actually, all the way to 1990, there was no rail system in the region. And in the 1980s, sort of a rail renaissance started in Southern California, starting with the Red Line, actually. Red Line was one of the first major, which was the subway system, was first rail project that was implemented back in the late 80s. And so today, we have quite a robust backbone of rail system that includes commuter rails, light rails, and heavy rail, but we still have a long ways to go. And so in the plan, we have a number of rail projects that would enhance and expand our rail system, as well as increase our network of rapid bus systems and our commuter rail system. But at the same time, while we're making all these investments, one of the big concerns that came to light recently is the declining ridership in our transit system. This is not just our local regional trend, but it's a trend that's statewide, that's nationwide, and we're also feeling the brunt of this trend. Yes, sir. I'll get to that in a moment. It's primarily bus, yes, but there is some slight decline in the rail also. So what we did is we partnered with UCLA to take an in-depth look at why this is happening, and so we looked at a number of potential causes that might be leading to this state, and the study basically pointed that one of the biggest contributing factor for declining transit ridership is the vehicle ownership, increase in vehicle ownership. There's been a dramatic increase in vehicle ownership across the region. In fact, the rate at which we're buying vehicles compared to early 2000 is almost 4 times. And so people that are traditionally dependent on transit are also acquiring vehicles at a higher rate. And so we're losing those, people that are traditionally dependent on transit from that perspective as well. So there are many other factors, but obviously, that we believe to be the biggest factor. So in terms of what we can do, we don't expect that trend to reverse, reverse anytime soon. That trend will probably continue. But one thing we could do is like I said, there is heavily transit-dependent population. In fact, 25% of the population that depends on transit ends up using transit the most. In fact, 80% of the ridership comes from that 20% of the population that's dependent on transit. At the same time, we have 80% of the population that doesn't use or rarely uses transit. So, for example, even if we could get this 80% that's not transit dependent to use transit, let's say once a week, it would make a huge difference in terms of transit ridership. So we believe that we need to focus on issues like that. Again, technology, the changing technology, disruptive technologies is also a big element that we're grappling with, making sure that we're incorporating new technologies as well as preparing for and getting ready in terms of not just infrastructure, but also having the necessary policy frameworks to maximize the benefits of these technologies is part of what we're trying to pursue through our plan development. Lastly, I'll touch quickly on the environmental mitigation program that we recommend through the plan. The federal regulations through MAP 21 requires that the regional transportation plan specifically address environmental mitigation measures, environmental impact of the plan itself, in the plan itself. So what we do is we address that requirement through the compliance with our CEQA requirement, which means development of a program EIR associated with the long-range plan itself. That's where we identify mitigation measures, and mitigation measures can really be some lumped into two big categories. One is from a regional big picture standpoint mitigation, and two more project-specific mitigations. Given that the long-range plan is a high-level plan, it is very difficult to get into the specific project-level mitigation. So the kinds of mitigation that we propose in the plan at a project-level mitigation are more recommendations and more best practices than project-specific mitigations. At a high level, we view the transportation plan itself as part of the mitigation. So as an example, in terms of regional level mitigations, what we propose is, again, investing more in public transportation as well as active transportation, basically expanding alternatives to solo driving, employee-based carpools and management of demand management strategies, trip reduction strategies. Those are some of the strategies that are proposed as part of the regional level strategies. In terms of more project-specific strategies, our focus really is on minimizing the land disturbance to begin with, and also some of the things that we could be doing to minimize, for example, the dust during construction stage itself. Again, these are really not enforceable actions. These are more of a recommendation that are proposed in the plan. So in terms of just a quick schedule where we are currently in the halfway through the process of updating our plan. Our plan is due for adoption in April of 2020. There are really four big stages of plan development. One is to get our technical baseline and data updated and corrected. And then second phase is have a larger dialogue on policy directions that we want to move towards. And the third phase is really developing the plan and putting out the draft plan for further public dialogue. And the fourth phase is obviously adoption of the plan itself. So we're currently at the point where we've got most of the technical information, including updating our growth forecast, working with our county commission partners to update project information. Those types of work is being done, and we're starting the discussions of major policy directions that we want to pursue in the next plan update cycle. With that, that concludes my presentation. I'd be happy to take a few questions.
Anecdotally, I've had two more of my friends that are business owners that are leaving California. What impact do you see on those businesses that are impacted by the various tax rules and regulations that are being passed by our friends in Sacramento, what impact do you see projected loss of more businesses to other areas and other states and other countries?
Again, those are some of the issues that go beyond what SCAG is typically addresses. Again, within the context of looking at the impact of transportation investments on the economy itself, I think it's reasonable to pursue identifying specific causes and specific reasons for that happening, and I would definitely.
And following up with that on the new port rules that you're considering, there's a lot of competition for that particular business, and there seems to be some concern directly from,
Sure.
on a personal basis, from friends that say, I don't have to come to LA and Long Beach.
Right, and again, we work very closely with both of the Port of Long Beach and LA, and we do encourage the ports to take the economic
Are you talking to your customers? Are you talking to the people that ship, the shippers?
Well, honestly, within the context of developing a long-range, high-level plan, we don't really directly have conversations with the customers to the extent that the ports probably do. And so we do rely heavily on input, just like we do rely on input from the major stakeholders in developing the plan. To the ports for making those kinds of policy decisions and judgments.
Yes, thank you. I recall seeing a presentation on the previous plan, and it seemed to me that the bottom line was to get people in high-density areas in a centralized location,
Definitely.
either taking the bus or riding a bicycle,
Mhm.
in apartment building type dwellings.
Right.
So I guess I'm trying to put together how the plan gets implemented and how it becomes a reality when you're dealing a lot with human behavior.
Mhm.
You have a bullet on increasing transit or promoting, public transit participation, and the trend is going the other way. You mentioned the
Right.
increase in car ownership has gone up 4 times. It's 4 times greater than it used to be in past years. So since a lot of those issues are dependent on human behavior, I'm not comprehending how it all pans out and how you get to the goal of these, goals that you've outlined, like for higher transit participation and things like that.
I mean, those are excellent points, and we do recognize that these, major shifts in trends and behaviors takes long lead times, and the plan will continue to pursue strategies that densifies key transportation corridors where we have the most transportation assets in densification around the train stations, in development of transit-oriented developments, in continuing to invest on active transportation. Those things will continue to be priorities in the plan, and we'll need to continue to do that from the standpoint that we will be needing, as I said earlier, to be meeting higher greenhouse gas targets that ARB is considering issuing to the SCAG region. Like I said, the last time around, the target was 13%, and they're most likely going to be increasing it to 19%, which means we'll be needing all of these strategies even more, pursuing these strategies even more aggressively. And it is a challenge. There's no question about it. and there's no silver bullet to in response to these challenges either.
I was reading recently an article on a California government website. I don't remember which website it was, but it was talking about the smog in Southern California, and it stated that approximately 50% of the smog comes from transportation, and further, more than half of the smog created by that transportation was caused by gross polluters. So does your program deal with gross polluters at all, or is that part of a different agency?
When you say gross polluters, are you talking about the stationary pollutions or
Mobile sources.
mobile sources, like the goods movement sector? We recognize that, like I said, the goods movement sector does contribute quite a bit to our air quality challenges, and so there are steps being taken to one more aggressively pursue cleaner technologies, and two also work with local communities to ensure that the goods movement system is working more efficiently, so that there is no waste.
I think you're referring to like smoking car going down the highway, the one
Smoking
bad,
cars,
the one bad
smoking,
actor. So the
smoking
1-800
tractor trailers.
Right. So that would be more AQMD, and it would be just getting people to report more of that to 1-800 cut smog. I know when I drive down the freeway, I see a smoking car going by. I call in the number and give them the license plate, and then they usually puts that person back into the registration queue, so they have to go back and get their car either re-registered or smog checked again and then re-registered. So that's the best we can do right now. AQMD in the past also, I think, supplemented CHP to go after those guys. I think I'm not sure if we're still doing that. No, okay.
It just
I
seems
thought
like
about that at one point, yeah.
a pretty easy impact if it's 50% of the smog,
Yeah,
and
more than
10 or 15% of the vehicles that are on the road are creating that, and they're pretty easily identified.
There's some programs out there. It's interesting. I drove through Arizona quite a few times recently, and a lot of off ramps. You'll see a mobile van, and they've got a van parked in the off ramp, and they've got 4 or 5. You can tell there's VMT sensors along the off ramp, and in that van is a bunch of cameras taking pictures of license plates. So if you go up the off ramp, it's doing basically a smog check as you're driving by. So maybe we need to do more of that, but that would probably fall back more to CARB. So, but
Okay, thank you.
Paul.
Rongshin, just a couple of comments. You mentioned there's about vehicle increase.
Ownership.
Vehicle ownership. Last week I was downtown at Nick Alexander. I had to take a look, right? It's a BMW joint. And the salesman almost tackled me because they have a 212 750i for $6,000 with only 80,000 on it. It's almost brand new. And they're trying to give those cars away, which is 4 years ago or 5, that car cost $100,000. So I think that the used car side, because of the prices have dropped so much,
Right.
it's incredible to see what's out there as far as deals go with a used car. It really is. But second comment, does your population studies encompass, like they say, the 30 and down group? I wouldn't say they're millennials, but they're young millennials, just out of college, because that group doesn't seem to want to drive.
We do. I mean, we've looked at it in a number of studies. It is still too premature. It seems like in the earlier stages that millennials. I guess this would be even. This would be what is it? The generation after millennials, the X generation. Yeah. So they tend to be more averse to using auto and more technology based and so forth. But it also, at the same time, there are studies that point out that as they age, as they mature, as they tend to again fall back to the old patterns of getting into automobile to some extent by necessity, I would think. So it's hard to project that as a pattern that will continue in a long-term sustained basis.
All right, thank you very much. Great presentation.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
We're gonna go back up to item number 3, the review of fallback action items. Philip?
Yes, there was a few action items. One was verifying that AQMD's involvement regarding the BKK landfill monitoring, just to see what activity had been happening. Per staff, there actually has been not been any monitoring on our part for at least 20 years, and for the BKK landfill. Also, there was a request to agendize a tour of the AQMD lab, and so we will go ahead and put that on the agenda for a future meeting. Yes.
Phil, last month I brought this up. I had, our business group met with the city manager of West Covina, because at that BKK, they're doing, the proposal is anyway, it's only a proposal. But that group has some serious money behind it. So there's gonna be major changes there, not tomorrow, obviously, but shortly. And I inquired if it was AQMD's relationship, for lack of better terms, with that area, because it's going to be developed, and that city council and the powers that be in that town are gung-ho for that. What does AQMD do at that BKK right now? Is it just sitting around?
Well, what we've been doing, we have been monitoring it for the last 20 years at least. So I guess I'm presuming there's no activity really.
But as they go through the development process, they probably would have an EIR, and I know our staff reviews EIRs from across all the counties, and that's when they'd pick that up and probably dig into it a little bit more.
I assume DTSC is the lead agency for that facility, and that's where most of the regulatory oversight would come from.
Yeah.
Okay. And so the last item was providing LGSBA members with a flyer regarding community meetings, and that was sent out on Thursday, February 22nd to the advisory group. And that's it.
All right. Rita?
Yeah, a couple of follow-up items. I had requested a presentation on the outreach activities that the district had committed to the board to do related to the printing industry, implementation of 219. And I know staff had said they were going to come back to it in February. I haven't seen anything, so just wanted to put it out there again for it to be revitalized. And then the second follow-up item, I guess it would be new today, but I mentioned it at the last meeting. There's a lot of talk on 1469 and the metal finishing industry, and the industry feels that the rule that's being proposed and the requirements are really burdensome, and especially financially burdensome. A lot of them are small businesses, medium-sized businesses that have to make significant investments, and they're not sure they can afford it. And the industry position is that there's a lot of money that they're going to have to invest, and the district is still not going to get the bang for the buck that they're spending. The environmentalists have a different position. They feel there's needs to be more monitoring and more stringent requirements. But LA County Sanitation, or the city, it was the city sanitation, they hosted a symposium to inform the metal finishing community about the availability of programs where they could get assistance, but it was more from the water side of things and from the wastewater side of things. And my thought was for the district to maybe do something similar as far as disseminating information and assistance, because there's programs out there like the recently released RFP that a lot of these small businesses and medium-sized businesses don't know about. So if the district could provide some information to the industry as far as trying to help them rather than, just imposing mandates. Thank you.
Paul?
Just a couple of housekeeping items. One, I did not get, and my colleagues were telling me about a sexual harassment training. I did not get that, and I understand that there's a time deadline on that, like this month or something. So I want to make sure that I get that, so I don't have any bureaucratic problems.
We'll work on that.
I got all your information as far as the meetings, but I'd like to have that so I don't have to, spend a couple days to do that, okay? Especially with the climate that it is right now, okay?
I believe it's an online version. It takes a couple hours, so you don't, it's
Okay.
not.
But nevertheless, I don't want to kill the afternoon doing that, when I can do it over the weekend or something. 2 afternoons. Yeah, 2 afternoons. Yeah, so please send that to me. I want to request that. Secondly, before we close it out, and what the local media and the national media is here, and even the journal is saying that AQMD now is, and I'd like you to inform me or enlighten me on this, or educate me on a taxing authority, okay? And I'd like to know more about that. We don't have to do it today, and not right now, but I'd like to put that on the agenda for next month's meeting as far as what's taking place, where it is, in the process, the ins and outs of it, because, taxation, what it is. So I'd like to know about that.
Sure. So would I.
One thing you may want to pay attention to the board meeting coming up. There was an item related to that just went through Ledge Committee earlier today,
It'll be
and it's
coming
going to be
back to the
discussed at the board meeting coming up in April 6th.
April 6th, thank you.
Yeah, it'll be an agenda item.
Yeah, definitely watch the webcast of the Ledge Committee from today, and then from a month ago also, when they first brought that up. That's where I got most of my information. Yeah. Rita?
Yeah, I had a follow-up question on that, because I watched that presentation this morning and I got to see the results of the survey, and it wasn't really clear to me from the presentation. Maybe I missed it. There was a lot of graphics and things like that. But it seemed to me that when they asked most people, are you familiar with AQMD? They said no. Like a large percentage were not familiar. But then the results of the survey were that, 2/3 of people would accept a tax that AQMD would put on the ballot measure to improve air quality. And my question was that 2/3 of the people that knew something, or was that 2/3 of the overall universe, including the people that had no knowledge? And a lot of the questions to me seem like they were leading questions.
Most polls usually are. I don't know the answer, Rita. Good point. But my guess would be it's the whole. But my guess is when they're asked about would you pay for clean air, they don't ask you would you pay for clean air through AQMD. They're just talking about clean air. So in that case, you do usually get a higher number. But as far as agencies go, I'm on RCTC, the Riverside County Transportation Commission. We just built a $1.5 or $1.6 billion project in the city of Corona, around that area, to expand the 91 freeway and the 15 freeway. We're doing another $600 million going up the 15 freeway. And when you ask people in that area, do you know who RCTC is? They go, no idea. So we're almost all these agencies are down in the teens or less of percentile of people that know what that agency is, let alone what they do by any one of our acronyms. So it's not too uncommon to hear that. So,
I remember it was about 15 years ago, the Humane Society of the United States, they did a survey. That was at a time when we were watching harp seal about to get bludgeoned by a hunter up in the Arctic, and there was a question there: would you donate to preserving or saving harp seals? And there was this outcry. Of course, they would protect harp seals. And then the other question was, would you donate $100? And it went down the other way. So I don't know. I kind of view this proposition here about the same way. So if and when it ever gets to the ballot. So.
Well, the first hurdle is we don't have the legislative authority to do it. So Oh yeah. Okay, we're getting off topic. You're right. All right. We'll talk about it later. Thank you. Nope. Good job. All right. With that, we have a written report attached. Any other business besides the business we just talked about we can't talk about anymore?
I just had one question, and if you defer it because Derek isn't here, that's fine. On the Small Business Assistance Report for February, the 5th slide, dry cleaner grants issued as of February 2018. Are those static numbers, or is there still money in those grant accounts?
There's still money in the, about 300,000 or so.
For CO2, for wet cleaning?
No, for wet cleaning.
Oh, that's the only one?
That's for wet cleaning.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Public comment?
Does this have a webcam on it?
What, a webcast?
Yeah.
Yes. Yep.
And I was trying to get one for about a year ago, but I had.
I don't think they started that until about 6 months ago, maybe a little less, right? The webcasting of this meeting?
It's on YouTube, our YouTube channel.
But how far back?
I'm
not sure.
I had seen it. There was something I was interested in that was on it, but I hadn't seen it recently. Anyway, I'll look for it to get up.
Okay. Any other public comment? All right, with that, we'll go to our next meeting, Friday, April 13th at 11:30. See y'all there.